You guys ready to scope this out? This is going to be a long video, but I think some of you that are unfamiliar with RAM overclocking might find it very useful. We're going to cover a number of things, including the basics about memory overclocking. So let's jump straight into the BIOS now and take a look at the settings that I've applied for a 6800 megahertz overclock on the memory. So you can see what I have my VDDQ and VDD2 set at. And let's jump over into the memory settings and see what I have set for voltage and timings here. So this will be a starting point since this memory has no XMP profiles to it. Any overclocking we do has to be done manually, which isn't bad really. You actually get better results from that. But this is a baseline. It's a known stable overclock that I've started with. And this should run successfully with any SK Hynix MDI memory kit that I have used so far. They're really good timings. They're not the tightest, and not as obviously not as high as you can go, but the voltage is reasonable and the performance is really solid. So for if you're primarily gaming, doing that type of thing, you should get really good results with this without having to go crazy high on the voltage and tight timings that cause errors and that kind of thing. So I'm not normally a fan of recommending copying people's settings because there's variance in RAM quality, silicon quality, as well as processors and graphics cards. But if you don't have an XMP profile to start with, you might want to try these settings as a starting point. So SPD write disable on some systems. If you're going to use IQ software or anything that needs to identify the memory, you're going to have to set that to enabled. Most of the additional timings other than the primary and secondary timings are just set to auto here. You're not going to get a big uplift on DDR5 by tweaking some of those settings. Actually, Hardcore Overclocking has some really good videos on DDR5 overclocking if you haven't already seen them. So let's jump into Windows and start playing with things. We're going to look at overclocking, we're going to look at thermals, we're going to look at some minor modifications that you need to think about if you're running DDR5, especially overclocked, in order to have good results. Thermals are a big challenge with DDR5 because it's running at such high clock speeds and fairly high voltage as well. So let's start out by running an AIDA64 memory benchmark and see what our starting point is. So you can see it's pretty good. Now, things that take a long time I've sped up on this video. Otherwise this would be much longer than a 45-minute video. So the AIDA64 benchmarks and the TM5 memory tests and things like that I've sped up to 10 times their normal speed to facilitate this video not taking forever in a day. I know you've got other things you want to do today, and I don't want you spending all day watching this video. But the more you know, the better you can expect, right? So if you're patient and watch as we go through this video, my hope is that you'll take some nuggets away from it. I was actually pretty good at DDR4 overclocking, and with DDR5 I had to relearn a lot of things. So if you're in that boat, hopefully I can save you some time. So we're going to tighten up a couple of timings here and see how it affects speed. There are just a few timings that have a bigger impact on the speed as well as latency. But those same settings can also require more voltage and produce errors. And as you're going to see a little bit later in this video, errors can often come from the memory overheating. And when I say overheating, it doesn't sound right in the terms of what you're used to with a computer, because overheating for memory is once it gets to about 50-55 degrees, even though it might be rated for 80, you start seeing degradation of stability. You need to keep those temps down in the 40s or less if you can. So as you can see, I've tightened up a couple of timings here. It did make some change. We haven't looked at our memory temperatures yet, so we need to take a look at that, because that's really going to affect what we can do with both the clock speeds and timings. And obviously the more voltage we use, the more that's going to become an impediment. So let's see if this is stable and what it does to our temperatures. I'm going to start out by doing run memtest pro, and I think we're going to find some errors. I've increased some timings that'll improve performance, but I think we're going to find that there's already our first error. Now, it took a few minutes to do that because it's 10 times faster than normal speed. But as you can see, we still have an error, and that's not going to fly. If you have any kind of memory errors when you're trying to do things, it's going to cause you problems, including a blue screen if you get too crazy with those timings. So yeah. So hang with me just a second here, decide what I'm going to do next with you. Let's jump back into the BIOS. Let's try changing a couple other things here. So we have our TRAS set at 28. That's going to require more voltage. Our TRFC is set pretty loose. Tightening that up will require a little bit more voltage probably, or else we'll see an increase in errors. And TREFI, that really has a pretty tremendous effect on speed and latency. But the higher that number goes, the more likely you are to have errors, more likely you are to run into blue screens, and the more voltage you're going to need. So let's see what happens when we change those two settings. So what we have done here is I've increased the voltage and tightened up a couple of other timings. So let's jump back into Windows and do a little bit more testing and see what that did to our speeds as well as our stability. Whenever you're overclocking RAM, you're going to want to go in small steps. You don't want to change a whole bunch of things at one time, because what you'll find is you won't know where you went wrong. So we can see the timings that the timings that I applied are showing in ASUS MemTweak. So let's run an AIDA64 benchmark and see what changed. You'll find that a small change in settings can create measurable differences in performance, but a very small change can take a stable system from stable to unstable. So make one or two changes at a time, stop, test, and then reevaluate. So we can see it did change our performance. But the question that needs to be answered now is, what did it do to our stability? What did it do to our temperatures? Temperatures with DDR5 absolutely directly affect stability. It did with DDR4 as well, but bear in mind we are running this at 6800, and it was very rare to find a DDR4 system that would run stable at 4800. You had to have really good Samsung B-die. You had to have a good strong CPU. IMC had to be strong. A lot went into it. So our latency is not fantastic, but it's better. Let's take that up a little bit more and see what it does. Let's take a look at what happens with our temperatures. We need to keep an eye on that, and you're going to see why later and as we go along in this video. Let's check our read speed first. You'll also find sometimes with the memory overclocking, as you change settings, the latency and speed will improve, and you'll go just a little bit more, and not only will it become unstable, but the performance could actually degrade. If there are errors in what's happening, then it's going to actually slow your system down rather than speed it up. So what does TM5 telling us? Is this stable? Nope, it's not stable. We're getting errors, and our temperatures are starting to climb. So let's cancel out of that. Let's try lowering the TREFI and see if that makes the errors go away. Nope, still got errors, so it's not stable. Let's try bumping up our TRFC, see if that helps. Now remember, when we were in the BIOS a moment ago, we increased our voltage. As you increase clock speed, you're generally going to have to increase voltage, but if you go too far, that can cause errors as well. There's a balance between temperatures, speeds, voltage, all that, in order to have a stable system. It's seeming better. No errors so far. Looking good. Is it going to hold true? I guess we'll find out here in just a moment. Nope. Still not where it needs to be. But you notice the temperatures. As the temperatures climb, that's when those errors started to appear. DDR5 is very temperature sensitive. If you're hitting 50, 55, 60 degrees, you're not going to be stable with DDR5 when you're overclocking. That can be misleading because it's rated, I think most of it's rated for 80 degrees, at least the specs that I've looked at, but you're not going to have good results at 80 degrees. It's kind of like Intel saying that their CPUs are okay at 100 degrees. Well, it might not kill them, but it's not good. It's not good for performance. Is this going to run stable? Remember, this is 10 times. Nope, it's not. Remember, this is 10 times the normal speed. I've sped it up, and I'm narrating video capture after the fact, so things are happening much faster on this video than what they were in real time as I was recording. Nope, still not stable. Let's try a less challenging TM5 test. See if that helps. No, made it worse. All right. Let's increase that. See if that changes anything. If your BIOS has the option to save profiles, I strongly recommend that you do that. If you got something that works pretty good, even if it's not stable, if it boots and runs okay and doesn't give you any problem as far as getting into Windows, save it as a profile as you go, because I found myself needing to restart over. That's what we're going to do here. I'm going to try giving it a little bit more voltage and see if that helps or hurts. Let's go over here and let's we're going to increase our VDD2. See if that helps. The VDDQ and VDD2 has to do with the voltage that's used communicating between the CPU and the DDR5 PMIC, from what I understand. So we've increased our memory voltage as well as VDD2 and VDDQ. And let's jump back into Windows, see if it made any difference, better or worse, or no change. What I typically find when I'm going along is I'll get excited because I get a really good benchmark score with Ada or the Intel memory latency test. Everything's looking really good, and then I go test stability and it just turned to crap. So memory overclocking can be very time consuming and frustrating, but this Sabrent RAM kit is the excellent candidate for it. It's got the SK Hynix M-Die chips on them. They overclock very nicely. They can take more voltage. The PMIC isn't locked like you'll find on some of the Samsung and Micron memory, which really limits you. I did a review recently that some of you may have seen on the Corsair Vengeance DDR5 6000 kit. It has Samsung B-Die on it. And it was really good, performed really well, and everything, and kind of hits a brick wall between 62 and 6400 because you can't give it any more than 1.435 volts. The PMIC is locked tight. So, but for gaming or something like that, where you just want to set an XMP profile, maybe tighten up a few timings, give it up to 1.435, it's still a really good option. And when you consider that the JDEC speed is 4800, that's still a massive overclock going from 4800 to 6400, but it's not as high as you can go with the SK Hynix M-Die. The A-Die that's coming later this year, early next year, is even better. It goes much higher. So that's, oh no, while the performance looked good, our stability's in the toilet now. Yeah, way in the toilet, blue screen. So let's go back in here. I'm halfway tempted to just set my default profile, start over again. Let's do that. I'm just going to reset that profile that I saved that was known good stable. Make sure all the timings applied. Yes, they did. There's a little bit loose, so we got our voltage back down lower. Our TRES, TRFC, TREFI, all back down where I started before tweaking. So that is a known good profile. If you guys want to try those settings as a starting point, you probably have good success. There is some variance in the M-die bin quality, but let's get into some thermal testing, because this is really important, and it's going to be misleading to you if you're overclocking DDR5 and having all kinds of problems with stability and errors and that kind of thing, and you assume that it's because you have a bad memory kit. Chances are really great that you're going to be wrong and the problem is overheating. So I'm going to give you guys a live demonstration of what I mean when I say that. 55 degrees, you're going to lose stability real bad. So back to where we started. Really respectable performance, nothing wrong with it. Let's watch our temps and see what they're doing. See if we can pass without errors, which we should be able to, because this is a known stable profile. Tested it extensively with, let's see, 5 different kits of SK Hynix M-die, and I've had no problems with these settings on any kit. So it should be good with a pretty good variance in silicon quality. So let's see if TM5 goes the distance without puking. Now this is the standard less difficult or less challenging TM5 test that I'm running right now. It completes a lot faster, and what I'd recommend you do is you start with that test, and if your settings pass and your temps are staying good, then you can increase the intensity of that test to know whether it's bench stable or game stable or 24/7 daily driver. So let's test the memory without the fan and see what happens. I have a fan blowing on the memory to keep it from overheating, and I just took the fan off, and I'm already getting errors. Look what's happening to our temperatures, and it's just puking out errors left and right because the memory is too hot. Even though the profile is known stable, the memory is freaking out because it's overheating. So that's no good, right? That's a great example of what I was just telling you about, assuming that you have a bad kit of RAM when the problem is actually you have bad thermal management. Let's got the fan back on it in a minute, and we'll see if the errors go away once we keep the memory cool. Yep, so we kept the temperatures in check. Problem solved. Let me think about what I'm going to do next here. Bear with me just a moment. Sorry about the pause here. Since I'm dubbing this in, so let's take a look at the actual memory and the fan that I'm using. So I mentioned that I'm using fans. So what I did here is I took a couple of small fans and I used just normal L brackets like you'd get from a hardware store, and I bent the bottom part at a right angle, put some rare earth magnets on them that are really strong. And so those magnets stick right on this ledge right here, puts the fan right over the top of the memory. Now look at what these memory modules have on them. See this thin, it's like a tin foil cover that's over the modules. I believe that's actually causing the memory to run hotter than it should. And we're going to explore that here in just a little bit, find out what happens when we get rid of those. But there's no place for the heat to go. It's being trapped. There's no real heat sink. It does have that foil cover, so, but what is that doing to our temperatures? Obviously we can't even overclock the memory without the fans blowing on it. But if we take those off, wonder what we'll see. So as you can see, like I mentioned, it's like a thin tin foil cover. It's thicker than aluminum foil and it's not easily damaged. It's got these foam pads to take up the space so that when you know, it doesn't have dents and things in it from shipping and handling. And I used a razor blade. See that perforated edge? I just ran a razor blade along the edge there to separate the part that was covering the ICs. I left the sticker on the back that has the warranty void if removed and the part number and that kind of thing. Only removed the side that has the IC on it. So yeah, it's like a tin foil cover on it, and it's trapping the heat. It also has an adhesive rather than a thermal pad. So let's see what happens without the cover on it. With the same settings, I'm running my same default starting profile that we ran a minute ago. We saw no errors with the fan. We saw errors appear with the fan. So this is the memory without the fan and with the cover removed. Let's see what happens to our stability and our temperatures. I think it's still not going to be quite enough. I think the temperatures are still going to get high without airflow, but not as high as they were with those covers trapping heat on them. So we're progressing. Nope, there. Now we got errors, and it's because the memory's too hot. So, yep, it's still too hot. So let's put the fan back on it again. Bear with me a minute while I do that. Okay, here's memory with the fan back on and the covers removed. And let's see what our temps and stability look like. Now, if you're paying close attention, you're going to see that the temperature sensors on this memory kind of freak out. They give us erroneous readings, sometimes really low, like 16 degrees, or really high, like 45 when there's no load. That's something about DDR5. I've seen the same behavior with the Unify X motherboard as I see with the Z690 Dark, and I'm not sure what it is. So yep, we passed with flying colors, not an error to speak of with the fan blowing on it. So there's your proof, and our temps are better. So our temps are not as high as they were before. So see, it's really amazing what just having a fan blowing on your memory can do. So before you write off your memory modules, be sure that you've done proper testing. Now let's take this up a notch. I'm going to use these water cooling RAM jackets and put those on the memory. I've got a gelid thermal pad we're going to put on the IC as well as the PMIC, a voltage controller. You can see the module in the background. I've already put one on. You can see that the RAM jackets don't completely cover the IC. They cover about 2/3 of it. But when they're covered, they look pretty nice. These are very heavy jackets. They have a screw-in top where you can bolt a water block or an LN2 pot on the top of them for extreme cooling. But we're just going to test them with these on here, nothing else. We'll test with and without the fan if we need to. But I think we're going to see a remarkable drop in temperatures just by having these thick metal jackets added so that there's some place for the heat to go. And if we do, then we'll resume our overclocking adventure and see where that leads us. So here is the memory without the fan running on it and with that heatsink installed. Let's see if just the heatsink alone is enough to allow us to to remain cool enough to not have any errors, whether we're still going to need the fan. One of the nice things about this memory, besides it being such a good candidate for manual overclocking, is that those tinfoil covers, I call them beauty covers, were very easy to remove. Many of the memory modules that you can buy now not only have RGB stuff on them that makes it a challenge to improve cooling. It actually hurts cooling because it adds heat to the module, right? And it adds heat to whatever they're using for a heat sink. So see, we passed with flying colors. The temperatures did creep up a little bit without the fan, but the temperature stayed low enough just by adding those RAM jackets onto the memory, where I was able to pass that test without using a fan. So step in the right direction. Let's check with the fan, compare temperatures, and see how much improvement the fan makes with those thick metal jackets on it. Should only get better, right? Can't get worse, because we're blowing on it with the fan. But as I was saying, so many of the memory modules that you get now, removing the heat sinks on them is very risky. I know of one person at least that has actually pulled the memory ICs off the PCB because the adhesive was so strong that it was stronger than the solder, and he destroyed one of his memory modules. You can do it if you soak them in lacquer thinner or something like that and soften the adhesive. You can get them off, but you got to be careful because you'll destroy the label that has the part number and that type of thing on it that's necessary for a warranty to identify the module as belonging to the company you're asking to replace it. With these, we don't have to worry about that because we don't damage the sticker on the side with no IC, so it still has the part number information on it to identify who made the module, but we can get it off the side with the IC that needs the cooling without a whole lot of rigmarole. So everything's looking good. Those memory jackets on it. Those are also inexpensive. Depending on where you get them, you can find them sometimes from Newegg or on eBay. You can get those Bikeski water cooling memory jackets for, I think I've paid as little as $10 and up to $20 a piece for them. Still really affordable, and I'm telling you, I have tested so many different DDR5 kits since I got on board with Z690, and every single kit that you can buy runs too hot. Limit your overclocking, has errors because of poor thermal management. I think the manufacturers are really not paying attention, not doing proper testing. So we've tightened up some timings here, and if these fly, we're going to go back into the BIOS and apply those as our new overclock. But by keeping control of our temperatures, we're going to actually position ourselves to run tighter timings. Now, if I was going to make this an hour and a half, 2 hour long video, we'd crank this up to 7,000 and do some testing and get that dialed in too. But in the interest of time, I mean, when I'm already giving you a 40+ minute video, chances are a lot of you aren't even going to stay with me that long. Those of you that are really curious about it will, and hopefully you'll benefit from it. That's why I do this, right? For you guys. If it were all about me, I wouldn't be making a video. Let's check and see what it did to our performance. got to be better, right? If it's stable and faster, can't hate that. You'll notice as we change some timing, some will really enhance the read speed, but the write and copy are harder to get up. And that's where the TREFI and TRFC really start coming into play. They help latency too. But you can get really high read speeds with some fairly sloppy, comparatively sloppy timings on other things. It's the write, copy, and latency. And those are pretty important metrics. So let's run another TM5 test to see if we're still stable with these more aggressive timings. So far, so good. Looking good. Yep. Voila. So that and those two, we're going to jump into the BIOS and set those settings the same, and then come back and test again. I have found occasionally the ASUS MIM tweak it or the MSI Dragon Ball will appear to apply the setting in Windows, and then when you go apply it in the BIOS, it's not stable. It doesn't happen very often, but I think sometimes the setting doesn't translate and you think it's stable and it's not. So we're going to make that 3333. We're going to max this out at 262143. That generally requires more voltage, but we're already running fairly high voltage. And we're going to change TW, RRD, SD, and DG to 57 and 46. That's what we just tested inside of Windows with ASUS MIM Tweak It. Hopefully that'll be stable. I'm going to come in and save it as a new profile. And I'm going to call it Sabrent RAM, or Sabrent Rocket 6800 plus cooling. Then when I get ready to overclock some more and push it further, I can come back and use that as a starting point. Really makes easy work out of it. But having a tool that you can use in Windows like ASUS MIM Tweak It or MSI Dragon Ball really helps, because you can kind of get a good feel to which direction things are going. If you use TM5 for quick testing, you can use a more aggressive TM5 profile, which we're going to do here in a bit, just to prove that it's really stable. Or you can use Run MinTest Pro. You know, that'll take a while to run if you, depending on how much coverage you set for it. So we see our BIOS settings did translate. ASUS MIM Tweak It is picking it up correctly. So let's see what Ada says about our performance. We'll run the whole thing this time. Make sure it didn't affect our L1, L2, or L3 cache performance in a way. That's the other thing that you need to pay attention to, is you might get an improvement in your latency or read, write, or copy speed, and then for some reason, for reasons that I can't identify so far, it'll do something really goofy, or it'll cause your cache performance to take a hit. I've seen that a few times, and I don't know why. I never saw that with DDR4, and I'm guessing that maybe an error is occurring in the communication or transmission of data with the cache. Let's go ahead and set a more aggressive profile here. Let's use the one this one here. Even though this is sped up 10 times normal speed, it's going to take a little bit longer because it is a far more lengthy test than what we were using for the preliminary testing. But we'll also get to see what it does having the memory under stress, what it does to our temperatures. If it was stable with that shorter test, it might not be stable with a longer test if the temperatures get too high. And I don't think we're going to have that problem now with the heavy metal jackets on the memory and a fan blowing on it, but the only way to be certain is to test it. But so far so good. It's looking great. So again, Sabrent, great job with this memory kit. You chose a good IC. You obviously did a good job on the manufacturing process. This is a good silicon sample, and it passed with flying colors. So if you think about what we've done, we've gone from an affordable memory module that doesn't have any XMP profiles, designed to run at 4800 with standard JEDEC timings, and we've jacked that up from 4800 to 6800. Man, don't you wish you could overclock a CPU that easily? So a massive overclock with improved timings, tremendous increase in performance, roughly double the performance. And that's it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and find it useful. Take care and God bless.